Welcome to the Great Basin Fire Potential Outlook for January through April 2018. Over the next few slides, we'll go over the recent weather that has occurred, how that has affected our drought conditions, the current state of the fuels, and our expectations for weather and fire potential over the next few months. Looking at the recent weather trend for December, temperatures were generally above average over the southern half of the Great Basin and near to below average over the northern half of the area. The percent of average precipitation for the last 30 days was very bleak across the Great Basin. All areas saw below normal precipitation over the last 30 days, especially across Nevada, Utah, and the Arizona Strip. Looking at how this has affected our snowpack, we still have near normal snowpack over the central Idaho mountains into southeast Idaho and into Wyoming, largely due to early season snow events. However, over the rest of southwest Idaho into Nevada and Utah, we have well below normal snowpack for this time of year due to the very dry conditions and warm conditions we've seen recently. Looking at the current drought monitor, the image on the left shows that drought has returned to the Arizona Strip, parts of far southeast Nevada, and into really the southern two-thirds of Utah. We do now also have severe drought that has redeveloped over southern Utah. Looking at the outlook for the next 3 months, the drought is expected to continue or intensify across the Arizona Strip in Utah and right along the Nevada-Utah border. We also will likely see drought developing over southern Nevada. Again, this is largely due to how dry things have been recently, where some areas of southern Nevada and southwest Utah have not seen any appreciable precipitation in over 60 to 90 days. Now we will look at the state of our fuels. First, considering fuel continuity and loading across the area, we had a very good year over 2016-2017, with well above normal fine fuel loading over much of western and northern Nevada into southern Idaho and northern Utah. A lot of that fine fuel loading is probably still around since we have not seen significant snowfall in the lower elevations. So we will be watching that as we go through the spring and see what carryover fuels we have, along with any additional new growth as the weather patterns change as we go through the spring. Over the southern half of the Great Basin, we've had very dry conditions, so we're not expecting any new fine fuel growth, certainly not over the winter precipitation, but we will continue to monitor conditions through the spring. Looking at 1,000-hour fuel moisture, very dry conditions over the southern two-thirds of Nevada, Utah, and the Arizona Strip, where conditions are below 6 to 10% over really the southern third of the area. Looking at 100-hour fuel moisture, we have some pockets where fuel moisture is below 5% in these very dry areas of the Arizona Strip in southern Nevada, and still very dry conditions continue across the rest of Nevada and Utah, based on the weather conditions we've seen recently. So now we'll talk about the state of El Nino and La Nina and how it will affect us. This animated loop shows how our sea surface temperature anomalies, how far above or below normal the sea surface temperatures are, have changed over the equatorial Pacific over the last couple of months. Looking at that transition from October through December, you can see cooling of the waters off the South American coast into the Central Pacific. This cooling will likely continue over the next couple of weeks and will likely dip further into a La Nina, or at least a very cool neutral condition as we go through the early part of the spring. However, those conditions are expected to change. Now we will look at the expectations for La Nina and El Nino as we go through the next several months based on the forecast models. Looking at the models, we are currently in a state of neutral but very close to La Nina, and will likely see these cooler waters continue for the next couple of months, with possibly a brief period of La Nina before the sea surface temperatures are expected to warm again as we approach the fire season. We'll likely be in a state of neutral as we go through much of the fire season. So now that we've looked at the recent weather, the fuels, and the state of global oscillations, where do we go from here? We'll start looking at the forecast models for the weather, the temperature, and precipitation across the next few months. Looking at January through April, we have been seeing very warm conditions with very dry conditions recently over the southern half of the Great Basin, and that will likely continue as we go through January, where the precipitation and cooler temperatures will continue to be focused over the northern half of the area. As we move through later in January and February, precipitation might start to dip a little bit further south, with above normal precipitation possible over the northern two-thirds of the area, with still southern Nevada, southern Utah, and the Arizona Strip remaining very dry and warm. We will start to see possibly a shift as we go through March and April of the warmer and drier conditions starting to move north across the Great Basin, with again very dry weather possibly as we go through the early part of the spring, and warm conditions for the southern and western half of the Great Basin. This will continue to be monitored because if we see this pattern, after some wetness as we go through January and February, we might see an early start to the fire season over parts of the Great Basin. Right now, it's still several months out and still a little bit too early to tell, but we will continue to watch this evolution over the next few months. So now after we've looked at everything, what are we expecting over the next few months? Generally normal fire potential expected across the Great Basin through especially January through March, and this time of year that would mean very low fire conditions. However, as we see these drier periods continue over parts of the area, we will, especially on windy days and even in slope-driven areas, see the potential for some fire spread if we see starts in these areas that have not received much precipitation, namely over the southern half of the area and over parts of western Nevada. However, as this precipitation hopefully starts to increase as we go through January and February over the northern half to two-thirds of the region, that will help mitigate some of these concerns. But again, that will still be something to watch after these dry periods until that moisture really takes hold, is the potential for some off-season fire spread. Looking nationally, again, very normal conditions over much of the west, with still above normal fire potential over Southern California really through the rest of the winter and spring. We will start to see some fire potential increase over the southern plains and really the southern half of the country, and even up north as we get into March and April. We will see how the next few months evolve and see if there's any areas of the Great Basin that will be seeing above normal fire potential, especially as we get into April, but again, right now it's a little bit too early to tell. That concludes our briefing for today. Check back next month for the latest seasonal updates.